More now on the large outbreaks of deadly diseases like Ebola becoming the new normal. That's according to the World Health Organization. Previous outbreaks have affected small numbers of people, but the Democratic Republic of Congo is now dealing with its second largest outbreak just 3 years after the world's biggest outbreak ended. The WHO says the world is entering a new phase and countries need to be prepared for new deadly epidemics. We can talk now to Dr. Oliver Johnson, who previously co-ran an Ebola isolation unit in 2014 in Sierra Leone, and he joins us from Johannesburg now. Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson, for your time today. You've seen the horrors of this particular disease firsthand, and based on your experience, why do diseases like this turn from being outbreaks to epidemics?
Well, I think that's such a great question. There's a famous epidemiologist called Larry Brilliant who said that outbreaks are inevitable, but pandemics are optional. So, it's inevitable that sometimes a new outbreak like Ebola is going to spring up. But how it suddenly turns from what is a village or a small number of communities experiencing the start of something to then expanding across a whole region and staying put is very much about the sort of the politics and the organization of the response. And I think the big thing that's happening here is that there's a lot of distrust amongst many communities in the response in the government, and there's a lot of politics at the local level. And so that issue of distrust means it's very hard for the World Health Organization or for the national government to really engage and work with communities on the front lines. We've seen violence against health workers, violence against Ebola treatment units, because there's so much fear that, in fact, there's other things that might be going on, conspiracy theories, and so it's playing into a much wider political and social sort of scenario.
So given that, you can see why the WHO then is talking about these epidemics becoming the new normal. In your experience, what can be done to overcome those barriers, particularly that fundamental distrust and suspicion around agencies, charities going in and trying to give medical treatment?
So I think there's a couple of things going on, and I think the WHO is absolutely right to raise the alarm. I've just finished a book on this subject called Getting to Zero, and we quote Bill Gates as saying he thinks there's a reasonable probability that in the next 10 to 15 years we could see more than 30 million people die of an outbreak. So they're right to say that these are getting worse. This could be the new normal. Some of that is to do with the sort of changing nature of the world, particularly the climate change emergency we're now experiencing, deforestation, shifting where animals are living, it's shifting the way that humans and animals interact. Organisms like mosquitoes are moving to new geographies and bringing diseases with them. We're seeing an increase in things like antibiotic drug resistance, and our British outgoing Chief Medical Officer, Sally Davis, has really been raising the alarm that many of the drugs that we've been using for decades to protect us are starting to no longer work because we've been overusing them. She said that there may even be the end of modern medicine, that we could see up to 10 million deaths a year by 2050 from drug-resistant antibiotics, and that requires research and better medical use of antibiotics. But there's another side to the science, and it is the social side. So we're seeing more and more populist governments coming into power who are playing quite fast and loose with science and the truth, and often promoting an anti-vaccine movement. And so there's a political element to all of this. There's also a technological element, and that is that in previous decades, people got their information from the radio. They got their information from the government. But now people get a lot of their information from WhatsApp groups. And so fake news, fears, conspiracies can spread very, very quickly, for example, on WhatsApp groups, not only in the UK or the US, but even in remote villages where they may not be running water, people have mobile phones. And so really rethinking how we engage with that changed information dynamic and saying we've got to build trust. And part of that is saying we've got to build basic, strong health systems. And the work that my team at King's has been doing is to say, how do we make sure that in every village in the world, someone can access a trained nurse? They can go to a clinic that's open that has drugs. That is our shield. That is our primary defense against these kind of outbreaks, is to make sure that in every community there is a functional basic health system available to everyone, because that's how you'll treat the start of the outbreak, and that'll be the focus of your response. And so I think a generational investment in health systems and acknowledging those issues of climate change and of trust are absolutely at the center of any future response and preventing the kind of pandemics that people like the WHO and Bill Gates have spoken about.
What more can parts of the world with highly developed health systems, and I'm not just talking about in the West, but even in urban areas in parts of Africa, because of course this latest outbreak is in Africa, in the DRC. Again, what more can areas like this do in terms of investment and getting those sorts of messages that you've been talking about across? I mean, because do you think there is an element of complacency from parts of the world and places in the world where they feel they're not going to be touched potentially by these epidemics?
I mean, I think that's right. There's different epidemics. There's emerging diseases like Ebola that spring up from time to time, but there's also things like measles. And we thought, and certainly the United States of America, thought that they had eliminated measles, that measles was history. But now we're seeing it come back with a vengeance. So in 2010, I think there were 63 cases of measles. So far this year, there have been 981 cases of measles in the US. We're seeing the same across Europe. And I think there is a level of complacency. I think we need to recognize that old diseases and new need to be at the forefront of our attention. With things like antibiotics, we've largely stopped investing. Pharmaceutical companies and others have largely stopped investing in discovering new antibiotics. And actually we need to kind of renew that investment in those new technologies. So that's definitely one part of it. It is, as you say, in all parts of the world, taking this seriously, investing in really good public health institutes, investing in new drugs, being much more rational about them. But at the end of the day, I think we need to recognize that none of us are protected unless all of us are protected. So it's not enough to say that we in the UK have a functional health system so we can end there. Because if counterparts in other parts of the world, in Africa or Asia or in any community, even within London, if we start to say within London, oh, well, certain types of migrants or others can no longer access health services, then we're creating pockets where these sorts of outbreaks are going to become rooted and a threat to all of us. So I think this is everybody's business. And we in the global community need to recognize that it's not only a humanitarian principle to say we need good healthcare everywhere, it's in our own interest as well, and that's something we're just going to have to redouble our efforts on.
Measles is a very good example you give, and given your experience of treating Ebola patients and what the World Health Organization is saying, we should be scared, shouldn't we?
I think we should be concerned, absolutely, and I think this is a great moment. This WHO is absolutely right to raise this concern. It's got to be on the forefront of our political agenda. So climate change has got to be in the forefront of tackling this. Investing in the NHS, investing in health systems around the world, investing in DFID and overseas development aid has got to be front and center, because we only have to go back about a century. We look at 1918, Spanish influenza. Now that killed between 50 and 100 million people around the world. That killed more people than the Second World War. So we've got to be, really alert to the fact that these outbreaks are a serious concern. We know what we have the tools, we have the solutions, but we actually have to now take action. Put climate change front and center, put health systems front and center. And without that, I think we are at risk and we should be alarmed.
Okay, Dr. Oliver Johnson, really interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time today.